Awesome. Cool. And without further ado, I'll let the first speaker be found to
We think a world in which Japan is able to exclusively protect its own interests by deterring China to invade Taiwan, avoiding regional conflict, avoiding any of the harms that could come to Japan through spillover of this conflict. Whenever we avoid that world, that is a better world for us. Three things to do for you in my speech today. One, some setup, then onto my two substantive points. One about how Japan is better able to deter China from invading Taiwan in this scenario, and then secondly, how we are able to better ameliorate our global position in general throughout the world, regardless of just Taiwan. So onto this point about setup, what do we believe Japan's interests are? We believe firstly their interests are things like regional security and stability. Why is this? Because A, they just don't want death. They don't want war in their region. They don't want the potential of these conflicts to spill over when people go outside of airspace and attack like a Japanese cruiser or another Japanese people. That brings the opportunity for war to spill over. And we also believe B, they just don't want a war in the region. They don't want this to disrupt trade. We believe they want natural resources in the car industry, which is limited in Japan, through trade, which ameliorates this. Secondly, we believe they have interest in Taiwan. They want to protect Taiwan. They want an independent Taiwan. Why is this? A, because they want trade. They believe that Taiwan gives them computer chips. Computer chips are really, really difficult to find and are very limited around the world. Who mainly has computer chips? We believe it's China and we believe it's Taiwan. I'll get on to why we believe China and Japan hate each other, so you therefore need Taiwan to be there as well. You need Taiwan for these computer chips. And then B, it's just like a counterweight to China as well in the region as well. So why do Japan and China hate each other? A, there are plenty of historical grievances between the two nations. Really, these go like to World War II and beyond that. We believe like the rape in Nanjing, these things are like massive across history that still like permeate today in both nations' psyche and society. So we believe there's B, we believe that ideologically we see in Japan a capitalist conservative nation, we see in China a communist nation. We believe there's conflict there. And then C, we just believe geopolitics. We believe Japan, has stood with the United States, with Western powers against Japan for the majority of its history, joining places like CETO or pursuing anti-China policy. I'll take a point of information now.
Can Japan just give aid to Taiwan without publicly announcing it?
We believe there's specific benefits that accrue when you publicly announce this to deter China from doing it anyway. We believe the value that we get in this debate is from stopping war from happening in the first place, not necessarily just helping Taiwan beat China. So how do we actually deter China from attacking in the first place Taiwan? In this argument, I'll prove to you that like through this public willingness, you ensure that like no reasonable Chinese leader is ever going to invade or to attack Taiwan. And why it's important, I kind of explain to you the interest of why you don't want conflict in the region as well. So context to this point, why does China want Taiwan? We believe firstly there's an ideological reason. We believe like throughout its history, they've always like hated the fact that Taiwan is not part of their country, that it's an independent nation. They have always claimed it to be part of it, and they principally want to appease that ideology in a lot of people and the propaganda they've taught to their own people that Taiwan deserves to be part of their country. Secondly, they want to deny the West of the valuable assets and particularly the computer chips that Taiwan has. And so what does this mean? We believe we see in China a lot of like saber rattling towards Western nations in order to try and get them to like stand down and to not support or to like entirely say like we're not going to support Taiwan in the future. We believe if they wanted to attack, they probably would have done it already throughout like the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s all the way through, but they haven't done it yet. They want to wear down these nations and the West and avoid causing conflict and avoid having to go through conflict. So how do we deter China? Firstly, we just saying we resist, we just add like more troops into this calculus and into this idea that like therefore China now has to deal with more resistance from us now. Secondly, we believe we have a significant military in Japan. Why is this? Because like military restrictions that have been like are being lifted from the United States on Japan. Why is this? Because of this policy and because of our public announcement, which means that now we are getting more troops. Again, why is this? Because the United States wants Japan to help. Japan is far more likely to be able to help when they have a bigger military, so they're doing these things, and also they want like Japan as a staging post as well to like help Taiwan. And then thirdly, we believe that Japan is uniquely, exclusively closer to Taiwan than the United States is. You believe like you have missile bases now in like Okinawa, we like a port and you have an industrial base in the region as well, in which you can far easily get things, get military, get supplies to Taiwan, which makes it far more difficult, for example, for China to cut off Taiwan if they wanted to. We believe, therefore, it is far easier for it's far more difficult for China to attack in this case. Fourthly, just other nations who look to Japan are far more likely to also be doing these things. Nations like South Korea, like the Philippines, will more likely to follow Japan if Japan is invested and they know they're going to be involved in this conflict. And then fifthly, we tie the United States to this conflict as well, and we keep them invested in this. Why is this? Because with our support, it's far more likely to be palatable to the United States public. Why? Because there's the thing we always get in the United States is that no one in the region is actually doing these things. It's just like foreign. It's like the United States military going to these places and fighting these wars. We believe when we in the region are actually doing something ourselves to do this, we're far more likely to make it more palatable for United States politicians to stand for Taiwan and to like engage in Taiwan as well. And we engage in Taiwan as well. What do we believe are the outcomes at this point in this scenario? We believe that ultimately, one, China is deterred. We believe the calculus just changes to a point where it is the calculus changes to a point where it's unfeasible and it is not worth it to do these things. We believe that now the saber rattling is no longer going to exist because now we have this vested interest in always supporting Taiwan and always trying to support Taiwan. We believe that in doing this, firstly, we keep the United States involved. We believe it's exclusive to our side of the house. We believe otherwise the support is quite flaky. Why is the United States support quite flaky without Japan? We believe we see this in Trump going to China, going to Xi in the recent visit, signaling a rapprochement between China and the United States. And then secondly, we believe that there's always this backlash if there's no regional support, as I explained to you. So what is the outcomes of this? We believe that we exclusively get the United States involved in the region, but we also just dare stand by ourselves to support this. We believe Taiwan is far more likely to be safe in the region, so we have our own interests secure, but also we do just avoid the conflict because China's never going to be willing to take this risk now because the saber rattling is no longer going to work because we're always going to be here and there's no point doing this. Why do we wear this so highly? Because we believe firstly there's a massive harm if there's a greater chance of war occurring. Now that spills over to our own economy, it spills over to our own people. Our people get caught in the crossfire. We do not want that. We do not stand for that under our side of the house, and our interests in the region are far more likely to be protected. So on to our second substantive point now about this global position and about essentially how our international reputation internationally is going to be far more better off, bringing us trade and closer ties and maybe some soft power as well thrown on top with other nations. So how do we prove this and why are we going to get better international reputation with other nations? Firstly, we believe when we stand up for smaller nations, it demonstrates to those other smaller nations like South Korea, like the Philippines, like Singapore, that we care and we protect our allies no matter what. Even if there's big scary China in the corner, we will protect you, we will publicly support you, and we will say we will not back down. Therefore, these other nations are more incentivized to ally with us because we're like a big brother and they're always going to step in and protect. Secondly, we believe when you stand for values and you stand for something, nations that share these values are also likely to support you as well. When we stand for autonomy, you stand for sovereignty, particularly other nations in the United Kingdom or in the West are also likely to agree with you on these things. They're likely to be more palatable to the public when you stand for these things. Therefore, publics in other nations are far more likely to, for example, buy Japanese goods or even just vote for a party that is willing to ally with Japan. And thirdly, you just get more trade with Taiwan because they've got this vested interest in you now. I think the outcomes of this are quite obvious, and the way we get more allies who protect us and are far better off. That is why I'm so proud to affirm.
I'd like to thank you for this speech and invite up the first speaker from the beginning.
A government's job and best interest is to provide and ensure safety to their citizens. I think both sides of House can agree with that. This is Japan's best interest, and we prove that every course of action that they take should fall into this line. So a few things in this debate. Firstly, on setup. Secondly, on why our side benefits the country. And thirdly, on why the comparative is not strategic. Firstly, on setup. Let's talk about Japan. First, from World War II to 2014, they have had little to almost no military development due to the policy being made. And so that just means that they have less military bases or military development or even resources to be able to create this. And so this entire jarring thing where they have, let's help Taiwan, I think it's just unclear and not a good thing for them to be able to do so. Secondly, we see that they want to protect their citizens like any good country does. And we also see that they don't want harm to their own country. And then lastly, they like Taiwan. Secondly, on China, we see that A, they are besties with dangerous countries with military capacity, places like Russia and North Korea, which we will further embark on. But B, we also know that China does want Taiwan, which is a bad thing. It's a negative thing, and that's how they clash with Japan. And C, we see that China is insanely rich. They have economic capacity and lots of power alongside influence. Thirdly, though, on public signaling. So what we think this looks like is an example would be the Prime Minister announcing on national television or something of the likes, or letting China and the public become aware of their willingness to invoke self-defense in order to help Taiwan. But on to my second point, first substantive, on why our side benefits the country. We have already contextualized this in setup, but also let's just go right into the mix. So firstly, we look at the immediate action that is being taken. If China jumps Taiwan, Japan doesn't have to send unprepared people, or the government doesn't have to allocate large sums of A, money, and B, resources, which could benefit their own citizens. And we see that this impacts the citizens because they feel more safe without the almost certain risk of being attacked by China due to their interception. Comparatively, we see that people would end up hurt, physically or mentally, if AF's world does play out, because we never know the outcomes of an attack or a war. The second mech is that Japan no longer has to carry an extra burden of promising their self-defense arms, in which leads to them being able to focus on more national matters, which is just intuitively more good for a government. We note that this, the motion literally says that it's the public signaling that is the main point of this debate. And so we think that if you post on every platform that your friend gets jumped and you're willing to get revenge and get back at them, I'm pretty sure you're going to have to follow through. And even though, even if this example is minor, on a bigger scale like this, it's even more hard to back out. And when you do publicly say something or announce something, even at a government scale, you probably are going to have to follow through. Otherwise, that's just illegal. The third mechanism is that the safety of citizens is super important. Firstly, we see that publicly signaling its willingness actually induces risks towards citizens. Firstly, because when that low-key threat is out there, China is most definitely going to respond, which will surely inflict violence or eventually end up in violent matters. If not, there will be rough sanctions that could continue to harm the country and those in it. So the cost of living is not something that I personally would wish upon a country. I will take a point.
Surely if the United States doesn't want to send its own troops to Taiwan, instead it would reinvest in building up the Japanese military and building it up to the same level that it could be.
Sure. So I think that the main point that I'm going to make, which I will respond further down in my second substantive point, but I want to heavily reinstate that the public announcement of Japan wanting to help self-defense with Taiwan, I think is it's just a bad thing. I think the action of having the US come into play is something that's not quite heavily important in this debate, just because it's not the biggest thing in the motion itself. But carrying on, the impact of that was just that the citizens feel more at ease knowing that their government isn't blatantly airing out their plans and what they are willing to do. So therefore they feel just more safe and more confident in their government, because I just think it's quite weird for their government to be airing things out if it's not quite planned out well, especially if their policy was was that they had no military, military before. I think it's just it's just not smart. But second substantive point on why publicly announcing that they are using collective self-defense is just bad for Japan. So for context, we see that Japan's military power is incredibly small and underdeveloped due to this policy existing for many, many years, meaning it's just not worth it for Japan to send in aid while publicly announcing it to the world. So the first mech is that when Japan uses collective self-defense, it's a bad thing because China's immediate response is usually to prepare to fight back. We're assuming that they're preparing to fight back because they see that yes, they want Taiwan, and Japan wants to help Taiwan. So clearly, China's like, okay, let's take both of you guys. Because we see that this looks like the way that they would respond is like tariffs and sanctions and fear-mongering that China usually does. And we also see that this is something that weighs a lot in this debate, while also taking into account China's power in the global economy and military connections like Russia and North Korea. Secondly, we see that if Japan really wants to help Taiwan and can't be neutral, it's far more better to do this privately between global alliances instead. And this is what responds to the point of information is that they can ask the US for help. They can ask them. It's not out of this motion to do that. We just think it's not smart for them to be publicly announcing and then assuming that people are going to come and help them. I think it's more smarter if they actively search help out, because of course their military base is quite small, so they need that help. Both sides of the house agree on that. But why is this? China doesn't get the opportunity to prepare for because based on the ignorance that they don't know Japan is coming to help Taiwan, they have no idea that that's going to happen. So these conversations can happen without public input, which gives these decisions much more clarity. Lastly, we see that Japan has more capacity to improve its own military if they were to do it privately. Why is this? China isn't constantly breathing down their necks, and even if they're not breathing down their necks, we see that Japan has a perception of China that they will do something to harm them. And we see that it means Japan doesn't have to take immediate action at the smallest things because of this promise, because of the public announcement that, hey, if they do something, we would like to defend ourselves because we believe China will do something to us as well. So we see if China does something even remotely small, we see that Japan doesn't have to keep constantly stressing and also stressing out the citizens, because what the government does is that everything they feel filters down to the citizens, which we believe is quite important in this debate. So the impacts of this is that firstly, Japan gets better resources for the military due to that underlining, seeking out for help, and it's important to help Taiwan. We see that in Japan. Secondly, we see that decisions are made with just more clarity because they're not irrationally saying out loud that, hey, we want to do this. We think that it's just more better and safer and smarter to be able to ask and seek for help privately. I don't think it's smart to involve the public because we get a lot of things like social media and news, and that's just inherently a bad thing because usually they like to haywire things a lot. And we see that lastly, Japan has a better stance on the political level globally due to strategic allyship. But why do we win in this debate? Because firstly, we see that if we prove that publicly signaling is harmful, we protect the Japan citizens and the government, which is just a good thing. We want to protect the citizens and we want the government to be able to do something great. And with that, I am very proud to negate.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and invite up the second speaker.
Japan can. Japan can help. How can Japan help? It can help by making a public commitment to the defense of Taiwan. 3 things to talk to you about in my speech today. First of all, on whether or not Japan does represent an effective force in the region. Second of all, on why it has to be public to have many extreme benefits, and on how their ideas of private build-up simply don't work. And third of all, to explain and expand on how we gain military autonomy through freeing ourselves from the shackles of the Second World War. So first First of all, why will Japan have an effective military or represent an effective force? They've told you that Japan doesn't have much of a force. One, they do have a force. It's just a self-defense militia that's easily convertible into an army if you give them the weapons. And two, Japan is uniquely suited to build an army extremely quickly because they have a highly educated populace, a very high GDP, and a huge production base, which means they can have massive military industrial complexes by just converting civilian production. Third, most of all, Japan is tied to the United States of America, who can give them weapons, sell them weapons, give them blueprints, and generally support them militarily to help build them up into a world-capable military very, very quickly. But I think the most important thing is what they tell you, where they tell you that Japan has international restrictions, when we know that since the Second World War, Japan has been banned from having a military by agreements with the former Allied powers like the United States, means that they can never build this private military or private thing to support them that they claim, because it's illegal and Japan doesn't want to risk severing ties with the United States. We fix this on our side, as I'll explain to you a bit more later on, when we simply allow the United States to have an easy and obvious excuse for lifting military restrictions on Japan. Before I move on, I'll take your point.
Can't the USA just lift these restrictions without making it publicly known?
No, because they're public international restrictions, and if people see Japan suddenly building a military, they'll go, hold on, weren't there supposed to be restrictions? But also, for the United States to lift these restrictions, because it's a democracy, it needs to go through their system, which one, means everyone finds out about it anyway, and two, means there is a chance of public input. So the United States government needs to have a situation where it is publicly acceptable for them to legalize Japan's army. That situation is when the people of the United States see Japan on the same side. That situation is where there's an existential threat in the form of China to the interests of both the United States and Japan, and that is clear through this public announcement. So I also just think that when they tell you that we can't do anything, they just don't engage with our material of being a vital base in the area and just having a geographic advantage. And let's move. So I think at the end of this point, we can just see that Japan does have the ability to build up very quickly militarily. And even though that might take some short time, we still serve a valuable role as one, deterring China by simply saying, we will stand by Taiwan. Because if Japan stands by Taiwan, and this is the most important thing about why it needs to be public that I'm going to get onto, but if Japan stands by Taiwan, the United States must. And if the United States does, they have a huge military, largest in the world, I think we'll be pretty safe. So moving on to the idea about the public. Now, they tell you that by announcing it publicly, we get done over because, one, we allow public input. I think Japan's officials being publicly elected means they're always going to be thinking about what the public's going to think after they take the action. I think this private move only applies right up until they do something, because everyone can see that they're doing something. They're not sending a covert fleet of merchant ships covered in a big tarp to Taiwan. People are going to notice. They're a democratic organization. They're accountable to the people. And so they simply don't have the capacity to privately build up an anti-China shadow army without anybody noticing. But I also just think that they have the military agreements which stop them from helping if they keep it private. We get rid of those when we go public. If it is private, they also will not be able to tie the US to the region. This is one of our most important mechanisms as to why it must be public. The United States needs to be tied to the conflict because it represents everything that is stopping China from taking Taiwan. As we've explained to you, the United States can be a little flaky on Taiwan as they build up more and more of their own industries that are no longer reliant on Taiwan. But they are heavily invested in Japan. Through the Marshall Program and through continued and extensive trade, they require the Japanese economy to be functioning and successful and working with the United States for them to be successful as a nation. They are heavily invested. They have a high amount of interest in keeping Japan alive. What then happens when Japan comes out publicly and makes a commitment to Taiwan? The United States government is got by the balls because they cannot go against this, because they have so much investment in Japan that if they go, oh no, we won't help Taiwan, their people will say, what the hell? We need to keep Japan safe. Their government, which has an interest in maintaining its own interests in the region, which are mostly represented by Japan has an interest in keeping things alive. So we simply tie the United States, who are already deeply tied to our survival, to the survival of Taiwan. We keep them engaged in the conflict, and that is why it needs to be public. That is why we can't do it behind closed doors, because governments may change. We need to command the public opinion that will force the United States to make international commitments to defend the nation of Taiwan from Chinese oppression. So that is why it must necessarily be public. I think also by being public, it gives the United States government an excuse to allow our military to rearm. Because currently, if we just went to them and we were in no way internationally committed and we just said we would like to build a huge army now, please, they're going to say no, because the law is there for a reason, because they don't want this random nation rearming for no reason. But when we go to them and say, hey, we're helping out with Taiwan, we've made an international commitment, so we need to be able to have our military, that is when it becomes acceptable for the international community, for the former Allied powers, to lift those restrictions, because it is obvious that Japan is possibly going to get involved in a conflict and thus should be legally allowed a military. This is huge. Why is this huge? Because when we have a military, we have the autonomy. That means we don't get bullied by states who provide us protection. It means we cannot be coerced. It means our citizens, the citizens that they told you would feel unsafe, feel much, much safer because they have a military to defend them, because they are not reliant on other countries. And it means that we have international leverage and bargaining power. We are simply a safer nation. Very quickly on citizens, I think when they tell you that our citizens are just going to be more afraid, there's always a possibility China could attack, and that is much scarier when we, the nation, don't have an army, which we've explained to you how we get on our side of the house. So the citizens live in existential terror on their side when there's nothing standing between them and China. We also just think that when citizens need the computer chips and are like invested in the economy of Taiwan, their economic concerns feel safer when they know that the government will support them and stand by them. And I just think that having a military makes you feel more secure. Not being bullied internationally because you're reliant on other people's militaries makes you feel more secure. And even if our citizens are a little worried, actually being safer in the region and preventing regional conflict keeps the nation of Japan safer, reduces the chance that these people will die, increases our economic growth, and generally, by making this public commitment, we call in people from all around the world. We remove our military restrictions. We give Japan the autonomy it needs to do what it needs to do, and we reinforce Taiwan. That's why we win.
I'd like to thank the speaker for this speech and invite up the second speaker of the meeting.
What's the first rule of Fight Club? Shut the hell up about Fight Club. Nobody talks about it, right? All right. So what do they present to us? Well, they present to us a couple of things. Number one, they say that, oh, we deter China from getting Taiwan. And secondly, they talk about the reputation. See, their entire case is great if we were Taiwan. Unfortunately, we're not. We're Japan. All right, let's talk about it. A couple things I'm going to do in this speech for you. First off, let me respond to everything that their case has built up. And second off, let me bring my own split into why, even if we did help them, this is like real bad for Taiwan. All right. So first off, what do they tell us? Well, first off, they tell us like, oh, hey, China, if we go, if freaking Japan is on Taiwan, on China, then China's not going to come. Right. So, but it's interesting to me because they tell us that like, hey, China hasn't attacked Taiwan because they want to whittle down the West. Right? So just let America run its course. I think both sides of the House agree there's already American forces within Taiwan. Just let America, who is a significantly more substantial military power within the political sphere, let America run its course. You don't need to get in there, my bro. Right? But secondly, uniquely ties Japan to Taiwan. But it's like, we've already established that America doesn't like China. And if China wants Taiwan, then America probably doesn't want China to have Taiwan. So they're probably already tied to the nation already because of resources, because of political influence. They're already tied there. You're just going in to be funny at that point, right? But then secondly, what do they tell us? Well, the second thing they tell us is like, oh, our reputation, yay. Right. So they give us a couple analogies. First off, they tell us like, oh, if big brother Japan is standing up for us little folks, then that's really cool. Right? But like, how big of a benefit actually is this? It's very unclear how much of a benefit this is to Japan within itself. Like, okay, cool. Singapore is rooting for me now. China's gonna drop a freaking atomic nuke on me, but it's okay, because Singapore's like, yeah, you got that. Right? And secondly, they tell us like, and second thing they tell us is like values and credibility. Like, oh, you know, we're more credible, so people are gonna trust us more. I think when China does inevitably dog on us, because let's be honest, Japan versus China has big money, big gun. Japan has American gun, which sure, but like they've said, you know, the freaking Japan's on that side of the world, America's on that side of the world, China's right next to Japan. Listen, the nuke's gonna come quicker than American tank, right? So when Japan does get dogged on, how much like Singaporean support is not going to matter in this debate. I will take that point before I move on.
If the Chinese military is clearly not willing to invade Taiwan for risk of international escalation, why would they invade a much larger country with much stronger ties to the United States?
Well, for a couple of reasons, right? First off, I think that, like, just Japan straight up saying, like, hey, China, we don't like you. Even though, like, yes, it is obvious already, but I think them just saying it out loud is even more of an incentive for China to put these sanctions on these countries, which inevitably whittles down to its citizens, right? You think things like terrorists. Now, because, you know, China, like, makes literally everything, right? It is significantly harder for these citizens to have a quality of life, which is the most important thing within this debate, all right? So what else do they tell us? Well, a second they tell us, like, you know, we are an effective force, and they basically give us a whole reasoning as to why it cannot be private, right? And what, like, yes, their points do stand, right? But that is only if we do go private. Bear in mind that, like, at first we tell you, like, hey, even if we really, really had to, which we really, really don't want to, we'll go private, right? And they tell us, like, oh, you know, you can't just go to America, like, please make me a military. Obviously, we're not going to explain it like that, because America doesn't like China. So it's obviously going to be a more in-depth explanation of, like, hey, you know, we want to help friggin' Taiwan, but we don't want to get nuked. So can you help us out, right? And also they tell us, like, oh, the people are going to see it. And then the people are going to be like, Japan, what the heck? I'm going to be honest with you. I don't even think most people knew about this. I didn't know about this until this debate. All right. So what do you think about the average person? Does the average person actually know about these things? Does the average person, like, actually care about secret shadow military if it's stopping a literal global war, right? But then secondly, you know, they tell us that, like, oh, you know, there's always going to be public opinion in this. Public opinion should not fall into the matters of war, alright? The public does not know what is the strategic point of war. Do not let them make a decision, please. Alright, I'll take that point before I move on.
Aren't the decisions of war made by publicly elected, publicly accountable figures in either side?
Yes, right. But the difference is, on their side of the house, these public people continue to be in that decision-making process, right? These public people continue down the line. We put a wall there. We're like, hey, at this point, you can't put any more input. Because when the public is telling you, invade Taiwan, right? I think to some degree that is going to affect your line of thinking. That is going to affect, like, how clear of a decision you can make. Because on the one hand, it's like, even though it might not be strategical to do this thing, if everybody's telling me to do this thing and I need to remain in power, then I have to do this thing. Which is just bad, because if it's an unstrategic move, then bam, boom, you're dead, right? So then what else do they tell us from this? Well, they tell us that, another big push that we hear from them is like, oh, you know, Japan does have enough military capacity is the word, enough military capacity to, to be fine, right? But the thing is, right, they paint this picture where it's like, oh my gosh, if we don't stand by Taiwan, then obviously China's gonna come for us next. No, because if America is so reliant on Japan, like they've said, if China even tries to step into the realm of possibility of whatever's happening over there, America's gonna be like, nah, don't try that. So this point is kind of confusing. I don't understand where they were trying to go with this. I'm sorry, that was a mean way to say that. Please don't kill me. Yeah, I'm gonna move on. Actually, no, I'll take a point before I move on if you guys have any.
Why would China nuke Japan if that would start an international nuclear war?
Oh, wait, hold on. Sorry. Oh my gosh, my notes. Okay, see, the reason is, right, if Japan gets Taiwan, then they're probably not going to be as scared because, again, Taiwan has all these cool resources, right? So then that probably empowers them to some degree to go like, yeah, let's go get Japan. But also, right, like, obviously China exploding Japan is like the most extremes of the streams, right? But I think they fail again to account for like the tariffs, the sanctions, the things that will down to the average person, right? Like obviously, you know, Japan's not gonna bomb China on a whim. That's extremes of the extreme. But again, sanctions, tariffs, the economy. Bro, living is expensive. I don't need it to be any more expensive. Please. Alright, now we're gonna move on before I run out of time. Why is it bad for Taiwan? Okay, so, you know, we've already told you again and again and again, you know, like, but I'll tell you right now, the Taiwanese, they do not have that much military capacity. I think that's obvious from both sides of the house. So what are the mechanisms for this point? First off, you know, again, you know, China can better prepare. Because, for one, they really want Taiwan. But for two, it'd be really embarrassing if they lost to Japan. Like, it's an ego battle. Alright. And then, second mechanism to this is like the Taiwanese people, right? They either A, they don't receive sufficient enough help from Japan, or B, even if they do, right? Then a lot of their resources that are specifically for the Taiwanese people now have to go to Japan, right? So then, what are the outcomes of this? Well, we just see that like the average life of a Taiwanese guy is like significantly worse because, let's say for example, like, I don't know, like you have to pay more money to get freaking bread because all that extra money is going to Japan because Japan's like, yeah, we're gonna help you and we're gonna take your money because we kind of need money to operate, right? So at the end of this debate, what you need to believe is that shut the hell up about Fight Club.
I'd like them to speak for this speech and invite the third speaker, please.
I'm just going to try and cover that screen actually, it's quite annoying. I think you can turn the brightness off again. Oh, it's fine. I've just got a paper. It's fine. It seems like the camera's still.
Is that dinner?
Yeah, it's all good. China can do nothing to Japan without starting a nuclear war and without disrupting the entire geopolitical calculus. I think obviously China is an incredibly rational actor. They have a consistent stance in geopolitics. I think obviously they don't do this. They just can't really do much to harm Japan in this debate. Okay, I'm going to do two things in my speech. Firstly, I'm going to prove why this is a important deterrent against invading Taiwan, but specifically why we weigh that so highly for the Japanese people. And then secondly, I'm just going to respond to their remaining points on internal impact. I guess kind of the extra national interest stuff. So, firstly, on deterrence of Taiwan. I want to note here, I think the only push they ever give you is that our army is insufficient to fight against China. I think, obviously, no, we've given you a ton of reasons at Michael why our army is really great and why we probably can actually deter China in a real stance. But just additionally note that that was never actually our burden to prove in this debate. Because the mix we gave you at James in terms of why we deter China in other ways, such as getting additional support from other countries, still remain. Because we probably still get other countries on board on our side, even if our military sucks. That was unresponded to. But more importantly, we get the US on our side in a way that simply cannot happen on the comparative. Because as we told you, US politicians always use this idea of there not being other people in the region doing their bit to justify cutting funding to really important humanitarian causes. I think the comparative here is that on our side, you give these politicians political capital to the extent which they can't justify cutting this money. I think the people in the US probably begin to care a lot more because they don't want to see China expand. They just push the politicians. We get all this money. And I think that is the reason why China is unlikely to invade Taiwan. Note that all of this can only ever happen if we publicly explain our intention of caring for Taiwan, because only then do you get the political capital to justify getting all these other countries on board. I think the way F tries to respond to this really major push we're giving to you about defending Taiwan is simply just to imply that there are kind of bigger interests to Japan in the whole entire scheme of things. But note exactly why we care about Taiwan being a sovereign country and why we care about them being stable and independent. Because Japan's entire economy is pretty much reliant on these tech chips, because the Japanese economy relies heavily on exporting technology and technological production. If China begins to control Taiwan, obviously we can't get these chips from Taiwan anymore, as we told you at Michael, because China really hates us. So we just never get these chips. We can just never produce anything. And this is a major harm on our economy, because we are so dependent. We are a small island nation. We are a small nation. We have limited natural resources. We just can never pivot. Otherwise, it would obviously be a major harm. And secondarily, of course, it just sucks for us if China gains more power, because we told you at James that China really hates us. So at the end of this point, what you should believe is that this is likely to be a really rational and important deterrent against Taiwan being invaded. But more importantly, that this is the idea of reducing the chance of Taiwan being invaded is critical to our own economy and to our kind of sovereignty as a nation. So now on to the internal impact. I think the first and probably most reasonable push they give you is the risk of us kind of being, I guess, pulled into any conflict that could happen if it were to happen between China and Taiwan. Look, obviously the entire previous point kind of responds to that, and that I just don't think you get that conflict in the first place. But I think there are a range of mechanisms additionally to why this conflict just never reaches us. Firstly, we have a ton of US naval bases on the Japanese coasts. If China decides to invade us, obviously that's a big threat to the US's biggest power base in the Asia region. They would lose that, so the US jumps in and defends us. I think, secondly, there's just a calculus for China in regards to the fact we have a whole bunch of nuclear weapons. So I think that they probably, they have this policy of not respecting the sovereignty of nuclear regions. They probably just don't invade. But I think thirdly, and most uniquely, is that it just changes the geopolitical calculus in a way that is unakin to China, because Xi Jinping in this debate is very rational when it comes to handling these geopolitical issues. I don't think he would want to stuff up the calculus and risk China's current positioning in the Asia region for what is relatively marginal gains and for what has a relatively low chance of succeeding. I think on this idea of sending our own, I think that means that China probably never invades Japan. Our citizens probably stay quite safe. I think that secondly is just on the idea of our particular citizens being drafted in to fight this war, which I think, no, they didn't really kind of make out a ton, but I think there was an assertion we heard. I think that the main push is that if it ever got to this point, this is something that Japan frames entirely as, I guess, a threat to China. I think it's just more likely that Japan just decides not to send anyone. We decide to stay in our relative comfort because China will never come back and invade us. Now on tariffs. I think that this is kind of perhaps one of the only things that is left for them to win on internal impact. I think that there are a few responses to this. I think the first is just to say that Japan and China already hate each other to an unlimited extent. So any trade that happens between the two is absolutely necessary, and they simply cannot just cut it off, because if they could cut it off, they would have already done it. I think that secondly, this is a short-term harm. Our economy can just pivot to other areas. It's such a small percentage. It never really has any impact on us anyway. I think it's unclear why the impact of tariffs on maybe 0.5% of our exports is actually enough to cause specific harm. Just seeing the time, will take a POI quickly. Okay, that's all good. I think that it's unclear why this impact on tariffs is actually sufficient to cause harm to our citizens when we tell you that we are creating great stability for our economy by keeping the thing of Taiwan, which we rely on, stable. That's obviously great for our economy. But I think lastly, on internal impact, they never responded to the push we gave you at Michael, which was on military autonomy. And know that this is an incredibly important impact, because I think with that military autonomy, our citizens do probably feel safer. I think that responds to some more of their material. And I think that you probably improve Japan's stability going forward. Because maybe in the future, far away future, if there's future conflicts, we could choose to do this in the back rooms. But I think in the current time frame, it is only possible to achieve any meaningful change by doing it publicly when we gain that political capital. I think lastly on internal impact is just to say that Japan is, as a country, I think we are I think our goal in strategically going into the long term is to improve our own self-determination, and that only happens when we have military agency, which can only happen by using Taiwan as a justification for expanding. Proud to negate.
I'd like to send the speaker for this speech and invite the third speaker.
This one's supposed to be right. Oh no, the screen's just really dark, so I thought it was off. Yeah, it's still on. Okay. Starting my debate. Oh. Two clashes in today's debate, firstly on public signaling. Is public signaling the right approach? And secondly, on which side better benefits Taiwan? But I should tell you that, adjudicator, the most important thing that you should care about, and how the opposition will probably win this debate, if they're able to prove that the mutually exclusive benefit of publicly signaling is the reason why they have that benefit outweighs our harms that we have highlighted to you. But we tell you that public signaling is just completely the wrong way to go, and we're going to tell you through 2 points of clash. Firstly, on is public signaling generally the right approach, and secondly, on which side benefits Taiwan. But firstly, on public signaling, what do we tell you? We tell you that the public signaling, the immediate impact of that is that China knows straight away. We tell you when public signaling is signaling, addressing it to the whole world, and I feel like it's pretty safe to assume that China will probably know straight away. And the reason this is bad, because China, as both sides agree, hates Japan, and we see that China is obviously gonna Japan, a country right next to the Taiwan, the biggest favorite food, they're obviously gonna create protections and they're obviously gonna be aware, and they're obviously gonna take advancements because they know Japan just ended the fray, especially because Japan is so geopolitically close to Taiwan, and that is a major harm. We tell you that the opposition trying to say that China doesn't actually look like they're gonna colonize Taiwan in the near future. If they did, they would have done it. So if they're not gonna colonize them anytime soon, then why would you just address it to the whole entire world and just make your civilians scared for no reason? If you can probably assume that they're probably gonna be safe anyways. But we tell you why is doing it silently much more efficient. Firstly, you don't have to face sanctions. I feel like sanctions, especially in the current status quo, is something that is constantly used. Even though you have never seen it in the past, doesn't change the circumstances into current status quo can be drastically different. Especially with the USA now doing sanctions. I feel like countries like China are probably now more incentivized to use it as well, seeing how effective it's been for the United States of America, especially because China is a big importer and has a big stake in the global economy. But we tell you that another thing is that when you publicly announce it to the whole world, especially with Japan, which is probably one of the most safer countries in the world, you put your people scared for no reason. I feel like this is generally a big harm, because when people are generally scared now that they're inserted into a war, I feel like these civilians are more likely to retaliate in much more harder things. I feel like civilians in themselves are unique and have their own political perspectives on things, and I feel like you just create over needed drama, especially for something that the opposition said would never happen in the first place. Are we just forgetting that? Oh my gosh. But what do you tell you? The opposition try to say when they choose to help Taiwan, USA will send them troops. I feel like in the current status quo, military power isn't troops. It's more like nukes and AI technology. I feel like just sending in people is just not a huge military power. But we tell you that if it realistically, it's gonna be nukes and AI technology. We tell you that if it is this thing, the big impacts that they try to gain is probably not gonna be as much. Like USA is not gonna give Japan, especially when they've been like 100 years with no wars at all, probably not developed. They're not just gonna give them AI technology, nuke expansion mechanisms of the equations. Like it just doesn't really work. But we can just do that as well if it really comes to it. We tell you that our worst case, that the USA can just send this more privately. We tell you that this is important because even if USA helps troops and they're going, I'll take the PI.
How does the US justify to the public sending their most valuable military technology when the public thinks Japan is just holding it?
But that's if the public know in the first place. I feel like a government has like millions of securities. I already told you, the government is to take care of the people. So why would they tell the people that they're giving like nuclear aid? I feel like that is just a big thing that already gives harm and makes people scared in the first place. I don't think the government is that dumb to do things. And the government hides stuff all the time. Are we just forgetting that the government just hides Area 51 from the whole world? Like, are we serious? Like, it's something that isn't like... You don't see people changing their votes because I want to know Area 51. Screw the Democrats. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, I don't know how that works. But, okay, the opposition try to give you this point about this big brother influence and how other small countries are going to help. We tell you that just because you say out loud doesn't change the circumstances that these smaller countries have to face and the reason that's generally bad. But we tell you that we incentivize smaller countries to help because we're doing it privately. I think smaller countries are afraid of China, especially because smaller countries definitely rely on China much more. And I feel like they don't want to be an out open enemy of China. So because we're doing it privately and we incentivize smaller countries to do it privately, we give them a much more safer avenue to actually help Taiwan and give much more money. Because if you're saying it out loud and now these smaller countries have to say it out loud, I feel like that gives huge expectations to these smaller countries, making it much more harder to make the decision in the first place. I feel like we give the big brother influence syndrome much more better now because we give them more accessibility to give more effective aid. And I feel like because we make it more safer to give effective aid, I feel like countries are more likely to give aid in the first place, overall helping Taiwan in the end of the day. But the opposition also tell you about the vital base in the area. They said that we haven't responded to this, but I'm telling you that from down the line, we said that just because we're saying that because it's a vital aid, it's important because Japan is such a close proximity to China, to Taiwan, it's better to do it quietly. Because if you just say out loud, it's like, oh wait, isn't Japan close to Taiwan? And the Chinese will know that and they'll just carry even more fear-mongering soldiers and much more higher like advanced protections that they already do. So once you just leak the one entranceway that you had to protect Taiwan, I feel like that's a humongous red flag, especially so now the whole vital proximity point just doesn't work if China already knows about it in the first place. But what does China not know? They don't know that Japan and that are working together, and because of that, I feel like it's more safer to assume that the vital point of them being close to proximity is much more better because now it's a secret. Now it can come out of nowhere, and it's probably going to be much more effective in that sense. Oh yeah, the opposition also said that it's going to be known because it goes through the system. I feel like they didn't say what the system actually looks like. I feel like so much things go through the system as well, and especially governments where they have very high security on confidential information. I feel like it's very hard for the whole public to know just because it goes through the governmental system. I feel like that's a very hard reach and it's incredibly uncharitable. But we tell you that that it's highly unlikely that like the wider public will know in the first place because the government of Japan, probably like just any other government, probably invests millions of dollars into having safe security. And as you say, they have a high GDP. They're very smart people. Why would they make the worst security to go through the government in the first place? So they're probably gonna have very good security to make sure that word doesn't get out. And yeah. So all the benefits that they have that are like causing like big brother influence or the benefit of the USA now getting help. Oh, they also talk about how the USA are now like they're tied once it's publicly announced. But I feel like you can still tie the USA back even without publicly announcing it through like more financial schemes, especially because Japan, Taiwan, USA, they all trade together at the same time. I feel like USA also really cares about Taiwan. So just because it's not publicly announced, I feel like we weren't told why those financial incentivizations to still still be tied doesn't exist. Like, I feel like the whole point about them being tied back is just solely from the public. It's just clearly untrue. Second, so what should you believe at the end of this point? You should probably believe that we're able to do this. At worst case, we may not get like as much influence because we don't say it out loud. But at best case, we're able to prove to you that we can still get this aid. We put people generally much more safer mindsets, because if you don't say it out loud, then no one will know. And we tell you that's more likely to be true because of the security. And yeah, so this is why we've won this debate so proud to negate.
Speak for their speech, and as is customary, reverse to speaking order and invite the reply speaker from the beginning.
Japan, China, Taiwan, and USA trickling in as well. These are countries that have been talked about a lot in this debate, and I will embark on points of clash and also why we win. But firstly, we'll look at private versus public, the invasion of China, deterrence, and just overall help, and then how a bit of weighing. So firstly, I would just like to say that if negating proves that publicly signaling is harmful, then we basically just help a bunch of people at the end, which is just a good thing in general. And also our alternative is conferring with other alliances rather than public announcement, which proves as a more like strategic play, because AF says that public announcement helps Japan like gain value like globally, but like if we get the same result but with a better way of doing it, then I think we win this point, because the US helping is not exclusive to this side of the house. Because we can literally do the same thing. Like, I don't think it's rare, and I'm pretty sure it's been done before, where government officials have met up with other government officials and have asked them for help, and have also like played out like what is the current issue right now, and they have also said where they would like to stand and why they would like them to help. And I think that it's just like kind of absurd for them to say that this is illegal in a sense. But yeah, onto private versus public. So firstly, we see that AF paints our alternative as like almost impossible due to like how like almost secretive or illegal being like private is. But I think private does not equate to illegal or secretive. I think that it just means that there's no like public influence or public knowledge on it. And we think that there's no harm in bringing like a strong matter in a private political like meeting between like officials. I think there's no actual need to bring it up publicly, because to be fair, everything that's gone public has probably been talked about privately first, and I think that that's just like how it works. And so seeing as like publicity, it like usually has a negative connotation and stigma as well, which I think just further harms like Japan in this case. Let's look at the invasion of China. So firstly, if China doesn't invade Taiwan, there's actually no need to publicly announce this willingness to help, because there's no issue in the first place. We see that this is taken as a precaution and something that they see as a benefit to themselves as a country because of something that could happen. But because of this, China has no reason to invade Japan if Japan doesn't publicly signal anything. Let's look at deterrence. So firstly, additional support is not exclusive to AF's side, because this debate isn't about how Japan should seek out like which country gives more help. It's whether publicly signaling is a positive way to go about letting Taiwan know that we want to help. Their push is that public announcement somehow entices others nationally and internationally to help, when we have already given you the mix of how public officials can still work without involving the public. Furthermore, on help, we see that this is like low-key our path to victory, because we are helping more of them. We are helping more than just Taiwan by standing by our belief that public announcement is just unnecessary. Who do we actually help? Firstly, we help Japan, which is the core country of this debate. They no longer have fear that China will retaliate, because they now are not publicly saying, hey China, if you invade Taiwan, we want to help Taiwan. That's literally a green card for China to be like, oh, let me take you guys on a ride too. I think that that's just more safe if they don't don't say it at all. We also see that we help Japan's citizens and their government officials, and we also win on scale and depth just because we affect the larger scale of Japanese citizens and international conflicts. And we also see that in depth, we see that the harms we outline trickle down from the government to the citizens, which we value highly in this debate. We also win this short term and long term just because the immediate mental ease and the better quality of life of citizens that AF didn't really quite respond to. And we also see that we avoid conflict as a whole because we're not publicly announcing anything. Proud to negate.
Thanks for making this speech, and invite up the reply speaker from the filming team to conclude the debate.
It's important to note that all the material we get from NEG about building this big private army and being able to essentially co-opt our benefits of having this deterrence and having this army is entirely contingent on two of the world's largest democracies being able to somehow hide a massive army that is able to defend Taiwan and being able to hide this from essentially China, which has like billions of spies everywhere in the world. So essentially, we just don't believe you're able to build a private army. Anyway, two main points of clash in this debate. One, what are the impacts on the Chinese rationale with regards to Taiwan and deterrence? And then secondly, what are the impacts on Japan's position on the world stage? So firstly, what are the impacts on Chinese rationale? We give you a bunch of reasons as to why we are able to better deter China from invading Taiwan. We give you the idea that, one, we have a significant military presence of our own. Again, we believe they aren't able to get us onto their side of the house. Secondly, we tell you that we strategically, just due to our proximity to Taiwan, give it a benefit. And then thirdly, we are also able to bring our military allies into this debate. We tell you specifically that we're able to bring the United States into this debate as well. Okay, what do we get in response to this from the negating team? Firstly, we just get like, oh, you're going to have a bad military. I think Michael gives you tons of reasons as to why we can actually build up a good military and are able to do these things. And I also touched on the fact that you just can't do this privately. We don't think it's possible to hide this massive buildup of an army. And we also believe that is entirely contingent on getting the US public support to do this. So, what, okay. Also, yeah, where am I? Hang on, sorry. We also believe, okay, with regards to the ability of the United States to like stay in and how we are actually able to like keep the United States involved in the Taiwan conflict. Because if we give you this characterization, I think at first, and we combine our material here, that we believe United States support is flaky and it is going away. We tell you that you need to have a public incentive on the people of the public to actually want and to be willing to support you. We see this in Iran, where there is no public justification for the war or reason why the everyday American wants to be involved in this war when the people there aren't actually doing anything themselves. We believe it's important that we tell to the American people that other people in the region are standing firm and are doing these things. That is a way in which you can justify to the American people and therefore get better American policy that is likely to keep you there. We believe you're only able to keep the United States here when we are public in our display, when we are public in our display of support, when we lead the way in doing this. We note that this is entirely exclusive to our side of the house. We see that this is the only thing that we can do here. We also get some material from like Third Neg and like from the Neg block about like, oh, they're just going to keep on doing this anyway, or like, oh, that doesn't matter because the war in Iran is not, that the war in Taiwan is not going to happen anyway, and so it doesn't matter. Why do we not believe this is the case? Because again, US support is flaky. We believe it's going to erode over time. Therefore, we need this now. And actually, without this, we believe that there is a chance that this war continues. So at the end of this point, what do we see? We believe that China doesn't antagonize, doesn't pursue a war or conflict in Taiwan. We believe that without our support, they're far more likely to do this. As US support erodes away, we bring them back into the fold. We also have our own benefits strategically and militarily, meaning we just don't believe there's going to be conflict in Taiwan and in this region. We believe that the effects on the public psyche, really firstly the effects on our public, on our interests, which we give to you down the line, is so massive when you don't have this war, when you're able to protect your trade. But we also believe like the public psyche when there is no war in the region is so much better. That is one of the ways in which we win this debate. Very quickly on our position on the world stage, really firstly we give you a lot of things about like particularly our allies and how we're able to build this when we stand on values and we stand for smaller powers, coalesce in the middle powers, Marcani, anybody. We believe that like firstly, firstly, there are two outcomes of this. One, you help us against China particularly. But secondly, this stands alone, separate from our material about China. This just extends our margin in this debate. Similarly, our material on autonomy, other military security that we get, as Michael tells you in his split, that we have the safety of this, but also we have this exclusive material that you are just not pushed around. We believe we extend our margin this way, but also we don't need this material. We can just win on this point, particularly about how the impacts, and we don't get war in China. That is why I'm proud to affirm.
Speech and all speakers folks thoroughly enjoyed the debate, and as possible to shake hands. I'll ask everyone to leave the room. I believe there's food waiting.
Oh, I'm so hungry.
Great stuff. I like the international ones.
I can just wait here and go there.
Yeah, I'm hungry.
Let's go.
Why do you say this?
It's right there. It's really good. So I recommend
Just
you
go
go there.
Next year.
Yeah. You have to rush.
Yeah.
Next year then.